The year is 1772. September has arrived with its first cool mornings, and in the grand country houses of Georgian England, a particular kind of quiet urgency has begun to settle over the domestic quarters. For the housekeeper, a woman we might call Mrs. Ashford, this is the moment when the year truly turns. Not at New Year, not at the spring equinox, but here in early autumn, when the light begins to slant differently through the still-room windows. She has held this position for nearly 15 years. Her keys hang at her waist on a chatelaine, perhaps 8 or 9 keys in total, each one representing a locked door, a locked cupboard, a responsibility, the still room, the preserves closet, the linen press, the china pantry, the tea chest. This morning, she rises before dawn, as she always does. The house is still. Only the kitchen maid is awake, laying fires. Mrs. Ashford dresses slowly, methodically. Dark wool gown, white linen cap, apron, keys. She descends the back stairs. Her office is small but orderly. A desk, account books, receipt books, collections of recipes and household instructions, some handed down through generations, others copied from other housekeepers, neighbours, published volumes. On her desk sits a list. She has been composing it for weeks, adding items in her careful script. It is a list of everything that must be done before winter truly arrives. Before the roads become impassable with mud and snow. Before the garden gives up its last gifts. Before the household must turn inward and rely entirely on what has been stored, preserved, prepared. The list is long. Before Mrs. Ashford can begin preparing for winter, she must understand precisely what the household already possesses. This is not a quick task. It will take her the better part of 2 days, perhaps 3, if she is thorough. And she is always thorough. She begins in the dry larder. This room is on the north side of the house, deliberately positioned where the sun never reaches. The walls are thick stone, and the temperature remains cool even in summer. In winter, it becomes almost as cold as the world outside, but never quite freezing. This is important. Frozen flour is ruined flour. The room smells of grain and dust and the faint mustiness that comes from stone walls. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is the smell of abundance, of stores laid by, of security. The shelving is made of slate. This is practical. Slate does not harbour insects the way wood sometimes can. It can be wiped clean easily. It is cold to the touch, even now in early September. Mrs. Ashford moves slowly through the space. Her hand trails along the edge of the slate shelf. She carries a small notebook and a pencil. The pencil is precious. Pencils are expensive, and she has learned to write lightly, to make each one last as long as possible. But for inventory, pencil is necessary. Ink might smudge. Ink cannot be erased if she miscounts. She approaches the first barrel. It is large, oak, bound with iron hoops. The top is covered with a tight-fitting wooden lid. She removes the lid carefully, setting it aside on the floor where she will not forget it. Inside is flour. White flour finely milled. This flour was delivered in June from the mill in the village. 3 barrels of it. And this is the last of those 3. She can see that perhaps 2/3 of the barrel remains. She judges by eye. She has done this often enough that she rarely needs to measure. 2/3 of a barrel. That is perhaps 80 pounds of flour remaining. She makes her note. Flour, white, fine. Approx. 80 pounds. She replaces the lid. Moves to the next barrel. This one contains coarser flour, used for the servants' bread and for thickening gravies. The barrel is nearly full. She judges it at perhaps £130. She makes her note. The next barrel is oats. The household buys oats in quantity. They are used for porridge, for oat cakes, for feeding the horses. This barrel is half empty. Perhaps £70 remain. She frowns slightly. They will need more oats before winter. She makes a note in the margin of her book. Order oats, 3 bushels. There is a barrel of barley, a small barrel of rice. Rice is expensive, used only for special puddings. A barrel of dried peas. A barrel of dried beans. She checks each one, opens it, looks inside, sometimes lifts a handful, lets it run through her fingers, checking for pests, for mold, for any sign of deterioration. All are satisfactory. She makes her notes. On the shelves are other items. Sugar cones wrapped in blue paper and sealed with wax. These cones are heavy, perhaps 9 or 10 pounds each. Sugar is expensive, very expensive. It is kept locked, and Mrs. Ashford has the only key. She counts the cones. There are 3 full cones and 1 partially used. She makes her note. Sugar, 3 full cones, 1 half used. There are smaller packages. A wrapped bundle that she knows contains a loaf of white sugar, even finer and more expensive than the cone sugar. This will be used sparingly for the master's tea for special desserts. A small box of lump sugar, already cut into small pieces. Beside the sugar is a small locked chest. This contains the tea. Tea is even more precious than sugar. Mrs. Ashford unlocks the chest with one of her keys and looks inside. There are 3 caddies. 1 contains green tea. 1 contains black tea. 1 contains a special China tea that the mistress favours. Each caddy is perhaps half full. She estimates the quantities as best she can. Perhaps 8 ounces of green tea, 12 ounces of black, 4 ounces of the special tea. She makes her notes. Tea will need to be ordered soon, before winter. The roads to London become difficult in winter. She continues her inventory. Salt. A large block of salt, rock salt, used for cooking and preserving. She keeps this locked as well, though salt is not as costly as sugar or tea. But it is valuable. And in a large household, it is easy for supplies to disappear if they are not carefully monitored. There are spices. A small locked box contains the expensive spices: cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, mace. These are bought in small quantities from the apothecary in the market town, and they are used sparingly. Mrs. Ashford checks each small package. The cinnamon is running low. She will need to order more. She makes her note. The inventory of the dry larder takes her nearly 2 hours. When she is finished, she has filled 3 pages in her notebook with small, careful script. She knows now precisely what she has, what she will need, what she can depend upon. Next, she moves to the wet larder. This room is even cooler than the dry larder. It has a small window high up that is kept open year-round to allow air to circulate. The walls are hung with hooks, iron hooks, driven into the mortar between the stones. In winter, these hooks will hold hams, bacon, game birds, perhaps a side of venison. Now, in early September, the hooks are mostly empty. The stored meats from last winter were eaten months ago. The autumn slaughter has not yet begun, but there are some items. On the slate shelving that runs along one wall sit earthenware crocks. Large ones. Each one is covered with a piece of muslin tied securely with string. Mrs. Ashford unties the first one and looks inside. Butter. This butter was made in July, during the height of summer when the cows were giving their richest milk. It has been preserved under salt. layers of butter and layers of coarse salt, alternating. The salt draws out the moisture and prevents the butter from going rancid. The butter will not be as sweet as fresh butter, but it will be perfectly good for cooking, and it will last through the winter. She estimates the quantity, perhaps 7 or 8 pounds. She makes her note. Butter and salt, approximately 7 lbs. Another crock contains more butter, prepared the same way, and another. In total, she counts perhaps 20 pounds of salted butter. This is good. This will be enough, with the fresh butter that the dairy will continue to produce for another month or two, until the cows go dry for the winter. There are other crocks: potted meats, beef, hare, pigeon. These were prepared during the summer months when fresh meat was available. The meat was cooked until very tender, then shredded or pounded, mixed with spices and butter, and sealed in crocks under a layer of clarified butter. The butter seal keeps the air out and preserves the meat. Mrs. Ashford checks each pot carefully. She looks at the butter seal. It should be intact, with no cracks, no gaps where air might have entered. If air has gotten in, the meat might be spoiled. But all the seals look good. She makes her notes. Potted beef, 6 pots. Potted hare, 2 pots. Potted pigeon, 4 pots. On another shelf sit hard cheeses. These are cheeses made last spring, now aged for several months. They are wrapped in cloth and sealed with beeswax. Mrs. Ashford unwraps one slightly and examines it. The cheese is firm, dry, with no sign of mold. She wraps it again carefully. Cheese, 11 wheels, various sizes, all good condition. She continues her inventory. There are eggs, preserved in water glass. A solution of sodium silicate that seals the pores of the eggshells and keeps them fresh for months. The eggs sit in a large crock, completely submerged in the water glass solution. Mrs. Ashford counts them, or rather she estimates. Perhaps 6 dozen eggs. She makes her note. The wet larder inventory takes another hour. When she is finished, she has a clear picture of what the household has for protein and dairy through the coming months. The still room is Mrs. Ashford's particular domain. This is where she works her small magics. The preserves, the cordials, the medicines, the cosmetics. This is the room that represents her skill, her knowledge, her worth to the household. It is a pleasant room, south-facing with good light from 2 tall windows. There is a work table in the centre, scarred from years of use. There is a small fireplace for heating preparations. There are shelves, so many shelves, running from floor to ceiling along every wall. The room smells of summer, even now as September progresses. Dried lavender hangs from the rafters in bunches, tied with string. Rose petals, carefully preserved in glass jars, sit on the highest shelf where the light will not fade them. There are bottles of elderflower cordial from June, the liquid pale gold and clear. Raspberry vinegar, made in July. Blackcurrant rub, a thick medicinal syrup made from blackcurrants and sugar. Mrs. Ashford begins her inventory here as she did in the larders, methodically, shelf by shelf, item by item. But here the work is different. Here she is not just counting, she is evaluating. A preserve might look good but have begun to ferment. A cordial might have developed sediment. A medicine might have lost its potency. She takes down the first jar. Strawberry jam, made in June, when the strawberries were at their peak. She holds the jar up to the light and examines it carefully. The jam should be clear, jewel-like. There should be no mold on the surface, no crystals of sugar, no bubbles that might indicate fermentation. This jar looks perfect. The jam is a deep, translucent red. She can see the whole berry suspended in the jelly. She sets the jar back on the shelf and makes her note. Strawberry jam, 7 pots, all good. She continues. Raspberry jam, gooseberry jam, red currant jelly, black currant jelly, apricot preserve, each one examined, each one noted. Some jars are already open. These are in current use in the household. Others are sealed, waiting. She counts the jellies. Jelly is different from jam. It is made from only the juice of the fruit, strained clear and set with sugar. It is elegant, refined, used for special occasions. She has apple jelly, made from crab apples. Quince jelly. This is not yet made this year. The quinces are still hard on the tree. Medlar jelly from last year. Only 1 pot remains. On another shelf are the cordials and fruit syrups. These are beverages, or can be used as medicines. Elderflower cordial, which tastes like summer itself when mixed with water. Raspberry vinegar, which is excellent for sore throats. A spoonful in hot water. Orgeat, made from almonds and orange flower water. Lemon syrup, orange syrup. Mrs. Ashford checks each bottle. Some cordials can ferment if they were not made with enough sugar. Some can develop sediment or cloudiness. She holds each bottle up to the window, examining it in the light. Most look good. 1 bottle of raspberry vinegar has developed some sediment at the bottom. This is not uncommon and does not mean the vinegar has spoiled, but she makes a note to strain it before using it. On yet another shelf are the medicines. This is perhaps the most important part of her inventory. In winter, when the roads are impassable and the apothecary in the market town cannot be reached, the household will depend on these medicines for everything from headaches to fevers to coughs. There are tinctures, alcoholic extracts of herbs, chamomile tincture for calming, valerian tincture for sleep, yarrow tincture for fevers, each one in a small dark glass bottle to protect it from light. There are syrups, horehound syrup for coughs, coltsfoot syrup for bronchial complaints, elderberry syrup for preventing colds. There are ointments, comfrey ointment for bruises, calendula, ointment for skin complaints, a drawing salve for pulling infection from wounds. There are dried herbs for teas, chamomile flowers for calming draughts, peppermint leaves for digestion, nettle leaves for spring tonics, raspberry leaf for women's complaints, feverfew for headaches. Mrs. Ashford checks each item. Some herbs lose their potency over time. She opens a jar of chamomile and sniffs it. The scent should be strong, apple-like. This jar is good. She opens the peppermint. It should smell sharp, clean, mentholated. Also good. She makes her notes. But there are gaps. The horehound is running low. She will need to gather more before the frost. The yarrow needs replenishing. The elderberries. She has not yet made this year's supply of elderberry syrup, though she has the dried berries ready. She makes careful notes of what she has and what she still needs to prepare. This inventory will guide her work over the coming weeks. The stillroom inventory takes her the rest of the afternoon. The light is fading when she finally closes her notebook and locks the stillroom door behind her. On the second day of inventory, Mrs. Ashford turns her attention to the linens. The linen press occupies an entire room on the upper floor of the house, near the bedchambers. It is a large room with shelves from floor to ceiling on all 4 walls. The smell of the linen press is clean. It smells of soap and sun, and the lavender bags that are tucked between the folded sheets. It is a pleasant smell, a smell of order and cleanliness. Mrs. Ashford works methodically, as she does everything. She begins at the top left corner and works her way around the room, shelf by shelf. She has done this so many times that she hardly needs to think about the process. Her hands know what to do. She has brought with her the laundry maid, a quiet girl named Pole. Pole is perhaps 16 years old, thin and serious, with capable hands. She has been in service for 3 years and is a good worker. Mrs. Ashford is training her slowly in the care of household linens. Together, they begin to take out the sheets. Each shelf holds a stack of folded sheets, perhaps 6 or 8 pairs to a stack. The sheets are folded in thirds lengthwise, then in thirds again, making a neat, manageable square. Mrs. Ashford lifts out the first stack and carries it to the table in the center of the room. She unfolds each sheet completely, holding it up to examine it. She checks for thin spots, holes, stains, any sign of wear. This first sheet is in good condition. The linen is still strong, though it has clearly been washed many times. The fabric has that soft quality that comes only with age and use. She refolds it carefully and sets it aside. The second sheet has a thin spot in the center. This is common. The center of a sheet wears faster than the edges because it is under the sleeper's body and receives more friction. Mrs. Ashford holds the sheet up to the light. The thin spot has not yet become a hole, but it will soon. This sheet should be turned sides to middle, a common repair. The sheet will be cut down the center, the worn middle strips removed, and the 2 strong outer halves sewn together to make a renewed sheet. It will be narrower, but perfectly serviceable. She sets this sheet in a separate pile for mending. Pole makes a note in a small notebook. They continue. Each sheet is examined. Each sheet is classified. Good. Needs mending beyond repair. The beyond repair sheets are not thrown away. Even worn-out sheets have value. They will be torn into rags for cleaning, or into strips for bandages, or saved for the rag and bone man who comes twice a year and trades them for small coins. The work is slow, but not tedious. There is something satisfying about this kind of careful evaluation, about knowing exactly what you have, about catching small problems before they become large ones. They work through the sheets, then the pillowcases, then the tablecloths, some every day, some for formal occasions, then the napkins, dozens of them, various sizes, various qualities, then the towels, then the servants' sheets, then the dust covers used to protect furniture in unused rooms. Each item is examined. Each item is categorized. Each item is noted in Pole's careful script. By the time they finish, it is late afternoon. They have filled 6 pages with inventory. Mrs. Ashford has a complete understanding of the household linens. She knows she has 23 pairs of good sheets for the family bedrooms, 7 pairs in current use, 11 pairs in the linen press, clean and ready, 5 pairs that need turning, 2 pairs that are beyond repair and will be torn for rags. She knows she has 16 blankets in good condition, 3 with slight moth damage that will need to be mended, 2 sets of mattress ticking that will require restuffing before winter. She knows everything, and knowing everything, she can plan. The plum harvest begins in the 3rd week of September. The exact date depends on the weather, on the ripeness of the fruit, on Mrs. Ashford's practiced judgment. She has been watching the plum trees in the garden for weeks, noting how the fruit swells and darkens, how the wasps begin to gather around the ripest plums. One morning, she walks through the garden early before the dew has dried. She reaches up and touches a damson plum gently. It yields slightly under her finger. When she lifts it carefully, it comes away from the branch easily, leaving the stem behind. This is how you know a plum is ready, when it releases willingly from the tree. She brings the plum back to the kitchen and cuts it open. The flesh is deep purple, almost black, with a bloom of dusty white on the skin. The juice stains her fingers. She tastes it. It is sweet, but with a tartness that makes your mouth pucker slightly. Perfect for jam. She sends word to the garden staff. The plums are ready. The harvest will begin today. The estate has 3 large plum trees. A damson, known for its small, intensely flavoured purple plums. A green gage, which produces pale green plums with an almost honey-like sweetness. And a red plum tree, the common variety, large and juicy. All 3 are heavy with fruit this year. It has been a good summer for plums. The gathering is done carefully. Each plum must be picked by hand. Shaking the branches, as one might do with apples, would bruise the fruit. And bruised fruit does not keep. Each plum is twisted gently in the hand, coaxing it from the branch. If it does not come easily, it is not yet ripe and should be left for another day. The garden staff work with shallow baskets, wide and flat, so the plums can be laid in a single layer without crushing each other. As each basket is filled, it is brought to the kitchen door, where Mrs. Ashford or one of the kitchen maids receives it and carries it carefully inside. The harvest takes most of the day. By evening, the kitchen table, the side tables, and even a clean section of the stone floor are covered with baskets of plums. There are damsons, perhaps 50 pounds of them. There are green gages, perhaps 30 pounds. There are red plums, perhaps 40 pounds. In total, more than 120 pounds of fruit. This is abundance. This is the summer's gift. And now it must be preserved before it spoils. The next morning the work of preserving begins. But first the fruit must be sorted. Not all plums are equal. Some are perfect, unblemished, ripe, firm. Some are slightly overripe, soft, with juice beginning to leak from small splits in the skin. Some are damaged, bruised from handling, or marked by wasps, or misshapen. Mrs. Ashford and the kitchen staff sort the plums into 3 categories. The perfect plums will be bottled whole in syrup. This is the most elegant preservation, and it requires the best fruit. The good but not perfect plums will be made into jam. The damaged plums will be used for wine. The sorting is done by hand. Each plum is examined individually. Perfect plums go into one basket, jam plums into another, wine plums into a large earthenware crock. This work is done at the kitchen table by Mrs. Ashford, the cook, and 2 kitchen maids. They work steadily, rhythmically. Sometimes they talk quietly among themselves, news from the village, gossip about the other servants, plans for the upcoming Michaelmas fair. Sometimes they work in companionable silence. The work itself is almost meditative. Pick up a plum, examine it. Place it in the appropriate basket. Pick up another plum. By midday, the sorting is complete. They have perhaps 30 pounds of perfect plums for bottling, 60 pounds of good plums for jam, and 30 pounds of damaged plums for wine. The jam is made first. Mrs. Ashford has decided to begin with the damsons. Damson jam is particularly fine, deep purple, intensely flavoured, with a tartness that balances beautifully with the sugar. The first step is to stone the plums. This is tedious work. Each plum must be cut in half and the stone removed. The stones are not thrown away. Mrs. Ashford saves them in a bowl. Later, she will crack some of them open and extract the kernels. These kernels taste like almonds and can be added to the jam to give it a subtle, complex flavor. The kitchen maids do most of the stoning. They sit at the table with knives and bowls. Cut, twist, pull out the stone. Cut, twist, pull out the stone. Their fingers become stained purple with the juice. The juice is sticky and attracts wasps from the garden, and the kitchen door must be kept closed despite the heat. The stoning takes several hours. Eventually, there is a large bowl of stone plums and another bowl full of stones. Now the cooking can begin. Mrs. Ashford brings out her preserving pan. This is a large, heavy pan made of copper. Copper is ideal for jam making. It conducts heat evenly and gives the jam a beautiful color. The pan is wide and shallow, which allows the jam to reduce quickly. She weighs the stone plums. They come to 36 pounds. She makes a note. For jam, she uses pound for pound, equal weights of fruit and sugar. So she will need 36 pounds of sugar. The sugar is brought from the locked cupboard in the dry larder. It comes in large cones, wrapped in blue paper, and it must be broken off in chunks. This is done with a special pair of sugar nips, heavy iron cutters that can break through the hard, compressed sugar. One of the kitchen maids does this work, cracking off chunks of sugar and placing them in a bowl. The plums go into the preserving pan. The sugar is added. Mrs. Ashford stirs gently with a long wooden spoon, mixing the fruit and sugar together. Then she sets the pan over the fire. The fire must be moderate. Too hot and the jam will burn. Too cool and it will take forever to cook and might not set properly. Mrs. Ashford has been making jam for more than 30 years. She knows what the fire should look like. She adds a log, waits, judges, adds another, waits. The heat begins to work. The sugar dissolves in the juice from the plums. The mixture becomes liquid, bubbling gently. It must be stirred constantly now. If it is not stirred, it will catch on the bottom of the pan and burned jam has a bitter, unpleasant taste that ruins the whole batch. Mrs. Ashford stirs. The kitchen maid, a girl named Betsy, takes a turn stirring. Then Mrs. Ashford again. They take turns throughout the afternoon, standing at the fire with the long wooden spoon, stirring in slow, steady circles. The kitchen fills with steam and the scent of cooking fruit. It is a deep, rich smell, sweet and tart at the same time. The smell of summer being transformed into something that will last through winter. As the jam cooks, it changes. At first, it is watery, with pieces of fruit floating in purple liquid. Gradually, it thickens. The liquid reduces. The color deepens, becomes richer, darker. The bubbles change. At first, they are large and watery. As the jam thickens, they become smaller, glossier, breaking with a thick, plopping sound. Mrs. Ashford judges the jam by eye and by instinct, but she also tests it. She keeps a small saucer on the table nearby. Every so often, she takes a spoonful of jam from the pan and places it on the cold saucer. She lets it cool for a moment, then pushes it gently with her finger. If the jam is ready, it will wrinkle when pushed, forming a skin. If it is not ready, it will still be liquid and will run. She tests the jam several times over the course of the afternoon. Not ready, still not ready. And then finally, ready. The jam wrinkles when pushed. It has set. The pan is removed from the fire carefully. The jam is very hot. It must be handled with care. Mrs. Ashford lets it cool for just a few minutes, then begins to pot it. She has prepared earthenware pots for this purpose. They have been washed, scalded with boiling water, and dried. They sit ready on the table, a row of clean, waiting vessels. Using a ladle, Mrs. Ashford carefully fills each pot with jam. She fills them right to the brim. There should be no airspace at the top. As each pot is filled, she sets it aside to cool. When the jam has cooled but is still slightly warm, she covers each pot. First, a circle of paper dipped in brandy. The brandy helps prevent mold. This paper is placed directly on the surface of the jam, smooth side down. Then another, larger circle of paper. This one, just plain paper, is tied over the top of the pot with a string, covering it completely. Each pot is labelled with its contents and the date. Damson Jam, September to 1772. The labels are written in Mrs. Ashford's careful, even script. They have made 23 pots of damson jam from this first batch. The pots are carried to the still room and placed on the shelves designated for preserves. Mrs. Ashford makes a note in her inventory book, and then they begin again. There are still more plums to be made into jam. Red plum jam, green gage jam. The work continues for days. While the jam making continues, Mrs. Ashford also bottles some plums whole. This is a more delicate process, and it requires the very best fruit. She selects the green gages for bottling. Green gages hold their shape well when cooked, and their colour, a pale jade green, is particularly beautiful in a glass bottle. The bottles must be prepared with care. She uses wide-mouthed glass bottles, perhaps a quart each in capacity. Each bottle is washed thoroughly in hot water, then rinsed and dried. Mrs. Ashford inspects each one carefully, holding it up to the light and looking for any cracks or chips. A flawed bottle might break during the heating process, and all would be lost. The plums are arranged in the bottles by hand. This is fiddly work. The plums must be packed firmly enough that they will not float around when the syrup is added, but not so tightly that they are crushed. Mrs. Ashford layers them carefully. One layer, then another, fitting them together like a puzzle. When each bottle is packed with fruit, she makes a syrup. The syrup is simply sugar and water, boiled together. She uses 1 pound of sugar to 1 pint of water. The mixture is heated until the sugar dissolves completely and the liquid is clear. It must not be allowed to boil hard, or it will reduce too much and become too thick. The hot syrup is poured carefully over the fruit in each bottle, filling the bottle to within an inch of the top. The syrup must cover all the fruit. Any fruit left exposed to air might spoil. Now comes the critical part. The bottles must be heated to preserve their contents. Mrs. Ashford has a large copper pot for this purpose. She places folded cloths in the bottom of the pot. This prevents the bottles from sitting directly on the hot metal, which might cause them to crack. She arranges the bottles in the pot, making sure they do not touch each other. More cloths are tucked between the bottles to keep them separated. She pours water into the pot. The water should come about halfway up the sides of the bottles, not too high, or it might boil over into the bottles. Not too low, or the upper part of the bottles will not heat properly. The pot is placed over a moderate fire. The water must heat slowly, very slowly. If it heats too quickly, the bottles will crack from thermal shock. Mrs. Ashford watches carefully, judging the temperature by eye, by the formation of tiny bubbles on the sides of the bottles. The water gradually becomes warmer. Small bubbles begin to form. Eventually, the water reaches a gentle simmer. It must not boil hard, just a gentle simmer with small bubbles rising steadily. Miss Ashford maintains this temperature for 30 minutes. This heat will cook the fruit slightly, and more importantly, will kill any yeast or bacteria that might cause spoilage. After 30 minutes, she begins removing the bottles one by one. This must be done carefully. The bottles are very hot. She uses thick cloths to lift each bottle from the water. As soon as each bottle is out, she corks it immediately. The corks are new, purchased from the travelling peddler in August. She drives each cork in firmly with a wooden mallet, making sure it is seated tightly. While the cork is still warm, she pours a little melted beeswax over it, sealing it completely. The wax will harden and prevent air from seeping around the cork. The bottles are set aside to cool. Later, when they are completely cool, she will tie a piece of bladder, sheep's bladder, which she has cleaned and prepared, over each cork as an additional seal. Each bottle is labelled with its contents and the date. Greengage plums in syrup, September 1772. Over the course of the week, they bottle 43 bottles of plums. The bottles are stored in the coolest part of the stillroom, on a lower shelf, where they will be protected from light and heat. The damaged plums, the ones too bruised or misshapen for jam or bottling, are saved for wine. In a household where nothing is wasted, even damaged fruit has value. Winemaking is a long process. The wine made this September will not be ready to drink until next spring at the earliest, but the work must begin now, while the fruit is fresh. The plums are washed first. Any dirt or debris must be removed. Then they are placed in a large earthenware crock. Mrs. Ashford uses a crock that holds perhaps 3 gallons. The plums are crushed roughly, just broken open so that the juice can escape. She does this with a wooden potato masher, crushing and pressing until all the plums are broken. Boiling water is poured over the crushed plums. The water should just cover the fruit. Then the crock is covered with a piece of muslin tied securely over the top. The muslin keeps out insects and debris, but allows air to circulate. The crock is set aside in a corner of the stillroom. Now begins the waiting. The mixture must steep for 7 to 10 days. Each day, Mrs. Ashford unties the muslin and stirs the mixture with a clean wooden spoon. She watches it carefully. Within a day or two, fermentation begins naturally. The wild yeasts on the plum skins start to work on the sugars in the fruit. The mixture begins to smell yeasty, alive. Tiny bubbles appear on the surface. After a week, Mrs. Ashford judges that the steeping is complete. Now the liquid must be strained off and the pulp discarded. She does this carefully, working in stages. First, she pours the mixture through a coarse sieve to remove the largest pieces of pulp. Then she strains it again through several layers of muslin to remove finer particles. Finally, she presses the pulp in the muslin, squeezing out every last drop of liquid. The liquid is a beautiful dark red-purple, cloudy but fragrant. She measures it. There are perhaps 2.5 gallons of liquid. Now sugar must be added. Mrs. Ashford follows a recipe that has been in the household for decades, written in faded ink in the back of one of her receipt books. For each gallon of liquid, she adds 3 pounds of sugar. So for 2.5 gallons, she needs 7.5 pounds of sugar. The sugar is stirred in until it dissolves completely. This takes some time. The sugar crystals slowly disappear as she stirs patiently with her wooden spoon. The sweetened liquid is poured into a demijohn, a large glass vessel with a narrow neck and a capacity of perhaps 3 gallons. She fills it about 3/4 full, leaving room at the top for the fermentation to work. A cork is fitted loosely into the neck of the demijohn. The cork must not be tight. The wine needs to breathe as it ferments. Gases will build up and must be able to escape, or the demijohn might crack. The demijohn is placed on a shelf in the coolest corner of the still room. Over the coming weeks and months, Mrs. Ashford will check it daily. The fermentation will be vigorous at first. Bubbles will rise constantly, and the surface will be covered with foam. Gradually, the fermentation will slow. The bubbles will become less frequent. The foam will subside. The wine will begin to clear. When the fermentation has finished completely, perhaps in December or January, the wine will be racked. This means siphoning the clear wine off the sediment that has settled at the bottom. The clear wine will be bottled in smaller bottles, corked tightly, and laid down to age. By next summer, it will be ready to drink. A sweet, strong wine, dark purple, tasting of plums and summer. But that is work for later. For now, the wine sits, transforming slowly, patiently, in its glass prison. October arrives with cooler mornings and the first real sense of autumn. The leaves on the trees in the park are beginning to turn, yellow and gold and orange. The swallows that nested in the stable eaves have left, flying south to warmer lands. The air has a different quality now, crisp, clear, with a faint smell of wood smoke and damp earth. This is apple time. The orchard is ready. The estate's orchard occupies perhaps an acre of ground on the south-facing slope beyond the walled garden. There are 20 trees in total, a mix of varieties carefully selected to provide different types of apples for different purposes. Some are cooking apples, large and tart, perfect for pies and sauce. Some are eating apples, crisp and sweet, for the table. Some are cider apples, small and hard, full of tannins that make good cider. Mrs. Ashford walks through the orchard on a bright October morning, assessing the crop. The trees are heavy with fruit. It has been a good year for apples. The spring was mild, with no late frost to damage the blossoms. The summer was warm, but not too dry. The autumn has been perfect. Cool nights and sunny days, ideal for developing flavor and color in the fruit. She reaches up and touches an apple on one of the eating apple trees. The apple is firm and cool in her hand. The skin is smooth, red and green, with a slight bloom that wipes off when she rubs her thumb across it. She twists the apple gently, lifting it upward. It comes away from the branch cleanly, leaving the stem behind. This is a sign of readiness. She bites into the apple. The flesh is crisp, white, juicy. The taste is sweet, with just a hint of tartness, perfectly balanced. She nods, satisfied. The apples are ready. The harvest begins that afternoon. This is work for everyone. The garden staff, some of the stable hands, even some of the household servants who can be spared. Mrs. Ashford supervises, directing the work, making sure everything is done properly. The method of harvesting is important. Apples for storage must not be bruised. A bruised apple will rot, and one rotten apple can spoil a whole crate. So each apple must be picked carefully by hand. The workers use ladders to reach the higher branches. Each apple is grasped gently and twisted upward, lifting and turning at the same time. The apple releases from the branch with a soft snap. It is placed carefully in a basket, not dropped, not thrown, but placed gently, one at a time. The baskets are wide and shallow, lined with soft cloth to cushion the apples. When a basket is full being relative, it should not be so full that the apples are piled and pressing on each other. It is carried to the sorting area that has been set up on trestle tables in the courtyard. Here, Mrs. Ashford and several others sort the apples. Each apple is examined individually. Perfect apples, unblemished, firm, the right size and shape, are set aside for storage. These apples will be wrapped and packed carefully. If all goes well, the household will have fresh apples to eat until March or even April. Apples that are good, but not perfect. Perhaps they have a small blemish, or they are misshapen, or they are simply not the right variety for long storage, are set aside for cooking. These will be made into applesauce, apple butter, apple jelly, dried apples, and various other preserves. Damaged apples, bruised, wormy, or otherwise flawed, go into a separate pile for cider. Even damaged fruit makes good cider, as long as the damaged parts are cut away before pressing. The sorting takes all afternoon and continues into the next day. Mrs. Ashford's back aches from bending over the tables, but she does not complain. This is her work. This is what she does. And there is satisfaction in it, in the careful evaluation, in the right decision about each apple, in the knowledge that everything is being used properly, nothing wasted. By the end of the second day, the sorting is complete. They have approximately 150 apples laid aside for storage. Perhaps 60 pounds of apples for cooking, and a full barrel of damaged apples for cider. The storage of eating apples is an art. Done properly, the apples will keep for months, remaining crisp and good. Done improperly, they will rot within weeks. The first rule is that only perfect apples can be stored. Any blemish, any break in the skin, any soft spot is an entry point for rot. Mrs. Ashford has been ruthless in her selection. Every apple chosen for storage is as close to perfect as possible. The second rule is that apples must not touch each other during storage. If one apple begins to rot, it will spread to any apple it is touching. So each apple must be isolated. Mrs. Ashford has a method for this. Each apple is wrapped individually in paper. She uses old newspapers when she can get them, or plain wrapping paper. The paper serves two purposes. It provides a barrier between apples, and it helps regulate moisture. Apples release moisture as they are stored, and too much moisture in an enclosed space leads to rot. The paper absorbs some of this moisture. The wrapping is done at the kitchen table. Mrs. Ashford and several of the maids work together. Each apple is placed in the center of a square of paper. The corners of the paper are brought up and folded around the apple, wrapping it completely. It is similar to wrapping a small package. The wrapped apples are placed in wooden crates. The crates are slatted, allowing air to circulate. Each apple is laid carefully in the crate, not tossed. They are arranged in rows like eggs, each one cushioned by its paper wrapping. When a crate is full, one layer of apples, not stacked, as stacking might bruise the lower layers, it is carried up to the apple loft. This is a room on the upper floor of the house, built specifically for storing apples. It is cool but not cold, dry but not too dry, and well ventilated. There are shuttered windows on opposite walls that can be opened or closed to regulate temperature and humidity. The crates are arranged on shelves, each one labeled with the variety of apple and the date of harvest. Mrs. Ashford makes careful notes in her book. Apples laid down for storage: 147 apples, 3 varieties. Storage date: October 3rd, 1772. Over the coming weeks and months, she will check the stored apples regularly. Once a week, she will go through each crate, examining every apple for sign of rot. Any apple that shows even the slightest soft spot will be removed immediately and used before it spoils completely. This vigilance is necessary. One bad apple really can spoil the barrel, or in this case, the crate. The cooking apples are dealt with next. There are several dozen pounds of them, far more than can be used fresh. Most will be preserved as applesauce and apple butter. Applesauce is one of the simplest preserves to make, but like all preserves, it requires attention and care. The process begins with peeling and coring the apples. This is work for many hands. The kitchen maids, the scullery maid, even the young girl who usually turns the spit. Everyone helps with the peeling. They sit around the kitchen table with sharp knives and bowls. The apples are brought in baskets from the courtyard. Peeling apples is rhythmic work. The knife moves in a steady spiral around the apple, the peel coming off in a long ribbon if you are skilled. Some of the peels are saved and spread out on screens to dry. Dried apple peels make a pleasant tea in winter, slightly sweet and fragrant. The peeled apples are cored. The center woody part with the seeds is cut out, and then sliced into pieces. The pieces go into a large preserving pan with a little water to prevent sticking. The pan is set over a moderate fire, and the apples are cooked slowly. Mrs. Ashford stirs occasionally with a long wooden spoon. The apples gradually soften, breaking down into a thick, chunky sauce. Some people prefer their applesauce smooth, and for that, the cooked apples would be pressed through a sieve. But Mrs. Ashford likes hers with some texture, small pieces of apple still visible in the sauce. Sugar is added toward the end of cooking. Mrs. Ashford does not use as much sugar in applesauce as she does in jam. Perhaps ½ pound of sugar for every 3 pounds of apples. The apples are already sweet, and too much sugar would mask their flavor. She adds a little cinnamon as well, freshly grated from a cinnamon stick. The spice warms the flavor of the apples, makes them taste richer, more complex. The applesauce is bottled while it is still hot. Mrs. Ashford uses the same method as she used for bottling the plums. The sauce is ladled into clean glass bottles, filled to the neck. The bottles are corked and then heated in a water bath to seal them. The heat drives out any air and creates a partial vacuum that helps preserve the contents. They make 24 bottles of applesauce over the course of 2 days. The bottles are stored in the still room, on a shelf reserved for fruit preserves. Apple butter is different from applesauce. It is cooked much longer, until the sauce becomes thick, dark, and intensely flavored. The long cooking caramelizes the sugars in the apples and transforms the flavor into something deep and rich and almost mysterious. Making apple butter is a project that takes most of a day. The apples are prepared the same way as for applesauce. Peeled, cored, sliced, and cooked until soft. But then, instead of being bottled, the sauce is cooked further. Mrs. Ashford uses a heavy pot set over a low fire. The sauce must cook slowly, reducing gradually. It must be stirred frequently, more and more frequently as it thickens, to prevent it from sticking to the bottom of the pot and burning. The sauce changes as it cooks. At first, it is pale golden, the color of cream. Gradually, it darkens. Golden becomes amber. Amber becomes brown. Brown becomes a deep, rich mahogany. The texture changes too. The sauce thickens, becoming glossy, almost like a paste. The stirring is constant work in the final hours. Mrs. Ashford and the kitchen maid take turns. The spoon moves in slow circles through the thick sauce. It is heavy work. The sauce is so thick now that it takes effort to stir. Mrs. Ashford judges the apple butter by its consistency. When a spoonful is placed on a plate, it should hold its shape, not run. When a spoon is drawn through the butter in the pot, it should leave a clear trail that does not immediately fill back in. After many hours of cooking, the apple butter is ready. It is almost black now, glossy and thick. It smells wonderful, like concentrated apples, like autumn, like something halfway between fruit and caramel. The apple butter is potted in earthenware pots, the same kind used for jam. Each pot is filled to the brim, covered with brandy-soaked paper and then tied with a plain paper, labelled Apple Butter, October 1772. They have made 18 pots of apple butter from this batch of apples. It will be used throughout the winter and into the spring. Spread on bread, used as a filling for tarts, eaten with cold meat, or simply enjoyed on its own as a sweet. Finally, there are the damaged apples to deal with. These will become cider. The household does not make vast quantities of cider. They are not a commercial operation, and cider is common enough that it can be bought if needed. But homemade cider is always superior to bought cider, and the household makes enough for their own use through the winter. The damaged apples are sorted one more time. Any truly rotten parts, anything black or mouldy, is cut away and discarded. What remains is good apple flesh, just bruised or misshapen or damaged by insects. The apples are washed thoroughly. Then they are crushed. The estate has a small cider press in a shed near the kitchen garden. It is a simple device, a wooden frame with a heavy wooden screw mechanism. The apples are loaded into a wooden basket lined with coarse cloth. The screw is turned, slowly pressing down on the apples. The juice runs out through the cloth and is collected in a clean wooden barrel placed beneath the press. This is heavy work, done by the garden staff and the stable boys. The turning of the screw requires strength. The apples resist at first, then gradually give up their juice under the pressure. The juice runs out clear at first, then cloudy, then darker as more pressure is applied. It is a beautiful golden colour, slightly cloudy, and it smells fresh and sweet and cidery, even though it is still just juice and has not yet fermented. When all the juice has been pressed out, the dry pulp, called pomace, is removed from the press. This pomace is not wasted. It makes excellent food for pigs, and it is carried to the pig pen and given to the household's 2 pigs, who eat it with evident satisfaction. The juice is left in the wooden barrel, covered loosely with a piece of cloth. It will ferment on its own, naturally, without any yeast being added. The wild yeast that live on the apple skins are sufficient. They will begin their work within a day or 2. The barrel is placed in a cool stable, out of the way, and left to do its work. Mrs. Ashford will check it periodically over the coming weeks. The fermentation will be vigorous at first, with bubbles rising constantly and foam forming on top. Gradually, the fermentation will slow. The bubbles will diminish. The cider will begin to clear. When the fermentation is complete, perhaps in November or December, some of the cider will be bottled for keeping. Some will be drunk fresh. And some might be kept in the barrel to develop further, growing stronger and drier as it ages. But that is for later. For now, the work of apple harvest is complete. The orchard has given its gifts, and those gifts have been received, sorted, preserved, and stored. Mrs. Ashford makes her final notes in her book and moves on to the next task. October is the last chance to gather fresh herbs from the garden before the first hard frost kills everything back. Mrs. Ashford knows this. She has been watching the weather, noting the increasingly cold nights, the mist that lingers in the garden until mid-morning, the way the grass is white with frost when she rises before dawn. Any day now, the first true freeze will come. The herbs that have grown all summer, the thyme, the sage, the marjoram, the rosemary, will die back, and the household will have to rely entirely on dried stores until spring returns. So she walks the herb garden in the early morning, when the dew is still on the plants. This is the best time to gather herbs. The essential oils that give the herbs their scent and flavor are most concentrated in the early morning, before the heat of the day has drawn them out. Not that October mornings are hot, but the principle holds. She carries a flat basket and a small sharp knife. She wears her everyday wool gown, her apron, a shawl against a morning chill. Her breath makes small clouds in the cool air. The herb garden is laid out in neat beds, each bed containing a different herb. There is a bed of thyme, common thyme, lemon thyme, creeping thyme. A bed of sage, common grey-green sage and also purple sage. A bed of marjoram. A bed of rosemary, though rosemary is woody and stays green even in winter, so it need not be harvested now. A bed of mint, though mint also persists late into the year. Beds of parsley, of chives, of lovage, of other culinary herbs. There is also a separate bed for medicinal herbs. Chamomile, with its small daisy-like flowers. Feverfew, similar to chamomile, but with a more bitter scent. Yarrow, with its flat-topped clusters of tiny white flowers. Lavender, already harvested earlier in the summer, but with a few late flowers still remaining. Mrs. Ashford moves slowly through the garden, selecting carefully. She never takes all of any one herb. The plants must survive, must have enough growth left to protect their roots through winter. She takes perhaps a third of each plant, cutting the stems cleanly with her sharp knife about 4 inches above the ground. This allows the plant to regrow somewhat before the hard frosts come. She cuts thyme first. The small leaves are still green and aromatic. She cuts several handfuls, laying them in her basket. The scent rises, sharp, slightly resinous, warming. She moves to the sage. Sage is one of the most important culinary herbs. It is used for stuffing, for flavoring sausages, for meat dishes. She cuts generous handfuls of sage, the leaves velvety under her fingers. Marjoram next. This is a sweeter herb, milder than thyme, but with a similar warming quality. Rosemary? Just a little for variety, though, as an evergreen, it will provide fresh leaves all winter. She gathers parsley. This will be dried and used for flavouring broths and sauces. Lovage, which tastes something like celery, and is good in soups. A little mint, though mint dries darker and less flavourful than when fresh. From the medicinal bed, she gathers chamomile flowers. These are precious. Chamomile tea is one of the most reliable remedies for sleeplessness, for nervous complaints, for upset stomachs. She picks the flowers carefully, just the flower heads, leaving the green parts behind. She gathers yarrow, both leaves and flowers. Yarrow is good for fevers, for stopping bleeding, for reducing inflammation. Feverfew, which is specific for headaches. A few late lavender flowers, for their scent and their calming properties. Her basket gradually fills. The scents mix and mingle. Sage and thyme, and chamomile, and lavender, and mint and marjoram. It is almost overwhelming, this concentration of fragrance. It is the scent of summer captured. When her basket is full, not piled high, but comfortably full. She returns to the house. It is mid-morning now. The sun has burned off the mist, and the day is clear and cool. Back in the still room, Mrs. Ashford begins the work of preparing the herbs for drying. Each type of herb is handled slightly differently, depending on its nature. The thyme, sage, marjoram, and other woody herbs will be dried in bunches, hanging from the ceiling. This is the traditional method, and it works well for these plants. The stems are tied together in small bunches, not too large, or the centers of the bunches will not dry properly and might mold. Mrs. Ashford uses ordinary kitchen string for this. She gathers perhaps 6 or 8 stems of thyme and wraps the string around them several times, then ties a knot. The knot must be tight. As the herbs dry, they shrink, and a loose knot will allow them to slip out and fall. Each bunch is tied with a loop of string at the top, suitable for hanging. Mrs. Ashford works methodically, bunch after bunch, thyme, sage, marjoram, rosemary. Each herb kept separate from the others. When all the bunches are tied, she hangs them from the ceiling beams in the still room. The room has low beams, old oak beams, dark with age, and there are hooks driven into them for this purpose. She hangs each bunch carefully, making sure they do not touch each other. Air must circulate around each bunch for proper drying. Soon the still room ceiling is festooned with hanging herbs. They hang upside down, their stems pointing up, their leafy tops pointing down. This position is important. It allows any remaining moisture in the stems to flow down into the leaves rather than accumulating at the cut end, which might cause rot. The chamomile flowers and other delicate flowers are dried differently. They would be damaged by hanging. Instead, Mrs. Ashford spreads them out flat on drying screens. These screens are simple wooden frames with muslin stretched tightly across them. The flowers are spread in a single layer on the muslin, spaced so they do not touch each other. The screens are placed on a table in the still room, in a spot where there is good air circulation, but no direct sunlight. Sunlight would fade the flowers and might reduce their medicinal properties. Mrs. Ashford checks the screens daily, turning the flowers gently to ensure even drying. The flowers will take perhaps a week to dry completely, until they are crisp and papery, and all moisture has been driven out. The hanging herbs will take longer, perhaps 2 weeks, depending on the weather and the humidity. Mrs. Ashford checks them periodically, reaching up and touching a bunch gently, judging the dryness by feel. The herbs are ready when they are completely crisp, when the leaves crumble easily between the fingers. When the herbs are fully dried, they must be stored properly. Dried herbs can lose their potency if exposed to light, heat, or moisture. They must be kept in a cool, dark, dry place in sealed containers. Mrs. Ashford begins with the hanging bunches. She takes them down one at a time. The thyme first. She strips the leaves from the stems by running her fingers down each stem. The dried leaves come off easily, falling into a large bowl. The stems are discarded. They have given up their flavor and are no longer useful, except perhaps as kindling for the fire. When all the leaves have been stripped, Mrs. Ashford examines them. She picks out any pieces of stem that came off with the leaves. She looks for any discolored leaves, any signs of mold or deterioration. Most are perfect, crisp, green-grey, aromatic. The leaves are placed in a glass jar. Glass is ideal for storing herbs. It is impervious to moisture and pests, and it allows Mrs. Ashford to see the contents at a glance. The jar is filled loosely. The herbs should not be packed tightly, as they are brittle and will break into powder if compressed. When the jar is full, she seals it with a cork and labels it. Time: dried October 1772. The label is written on a small piece of paper and pasted to the jar with a flour and water paste. She repeats the process with each type of herb. Sage leaves stripped from stems, examined, jarred, labeled. Marjoram, rosemary, parsley, each herb ending up in its own jar, its own place on the still room shelves. The dried chamomile flowers are handled even more gently. They are extremely delicate and will crumble at the slightest pressure. Mrs. Ashford picks them up carefully from the drying screens, one by one, and places them in a jar. She does not pack them, just lace them in loosely until the jar is full. The chamomile jar is sealed and labeled like the others. When she needs chamomile tea during the winter, she will open this jar and remove just a few flowers at a time, using them to make a healing infusion for whoever in the household needs it. By the time all the herbs are jarred and labeled, the still room shelves have gained another dozen jars. They sit in neat rows, their labels facing outward, their contents visible through the glass. It is satisfying. It is order. It is preparation. Some herbs are not dried, but are made into preparations immediately, while they are still fresh. The fresh herbs contain volatile oils that might be lost during drying, and these preparations capture those oils while they are at their peak. Mrs. Ashford makes several preparations each autumn. The recipes are in her receipt book, written in her own hand, or copied from other housekeepers over the years. She begins with an elderberry syrup. Elderberries are one of the most valuable medicinal plants. Taken daily throughout the winter, elderberry syrup is thought to strengthen the constitution and prevent colds and influenzas. Mrs. Ashford makes this syrup every year without fail. She gathered the elderberries several weeks ago in late September, when they were fully ripe and dark purple. She dried them then, spreading them on screens just as she dried the chamomile flowers. Now the dried berries are ready to be made into syrup. The dried elderberries are placed in a pot with water and heated gently. The berries swell and burst, releasing their juice. The liquid becomes deep purple, almost black. After simmering for 30 minutes, Mrs. Ashford strains the liquid through muslin, pressing the berries to extract every drop. She measures the liquid. There are 2 pints. For every pint of elderberry liquid, she adds 1 pound of honey and a ½ ounce of whole spices, cloves, cinnamon, and ginger, tied in a muslin bag so they can be removed later. The mixture is heated again, simmering, until the honey dissolves completely and the flavors meld together. After another 30 minutes, Mrs. Ashford removes the spice bag and bottles the syrup in small glass bottles. Each bottle holds perhaps ½ a pint. The syrup is thick, dark, fragrant. It tastes sweet and tart and spicy all at once. A spoonful each morning is the recommended dose. The bottles are corked, sealed, labeled, and stored. She makes other preparations. A lavender oil, fresh lavender flowers steeped in sweet almond oil for weeks, then strained. This oil is used for headaches, for minor burns, for calming nerves. A peppermint tincture. Fresh peppermint leaves steeped in spirits of wine, creating a powerful extract that can be used for digestive complaints. A rosemary hair wash. Rosemary leaves simmered in water, then strained and bottled. This wash is thought to strengthen the hair and prevent its loss. Each preparation is made carefully, following recipes that have been proven over years of use, Each one is labeled and dated. Each one adds to the stillroom's store of remedies and useful preparations. By the time this work is complete, Mrs. Ashford has used every fresh herb the garden could provide. Nothing has been wasted. And the household is prepared with flavourings for the winter's food, prepared with medicines for the winter's inevitable colds and coughs and fevers. Winter means darkness. In the depths of December and January, the sun rises late and sets early. The household will spend long hours in darkness, or rather, in the small pools of light created by candles and fires. Candles are essential. Without candles, there is no work that can be done after dark, no reading, no sewing, no life beyond the firelight. The household will need hundreds of candles to see them through the winter. Making these candles is a project that occupies several days in late October or early November. When the weather is cool enough that the tallow will set properly, but not so cold that it becomes difficult to work with. Mrs. Ashford has been preparing for this work all year. Every time meat was cooked, beef, mutton, venison, the fat was saved. Not all fat, just the hard fat from around the kidneys and other internal organs. This is the best fat for candle making. It is clean, pure, and makes good hard candles that burn steadily. The saved fat has been stored in a cool room, in covered crocks. Now it must be rendered into tallow, the purified fat suitable for candles. The rendering is done in the kitchen. Mrs. Ashford brings the crocks of fat and begins the work. The fat is hard, waxy, yellowish white. She cuts it into small pieces with a heavy knife. The smaller the pieces, the faster they will melt. The pieces of fat go into a large iron pot. The pot is set over a low fire, very low. Tallow must be melted slowly. If it is heated too quickly, if it boils or smokes, it will become dark and rancid smelling, and it will make poor candles. Mrs. Ashford tends the pot carefully. The fat gradually melts, becoming liquid. It takes hours. She stirs occasionally, breaking up any lumps. The melted fat is clear and golden, like honey. It smells somewhat. Not unpleasant exactly, but distinctly animal. This is unavoidable. As the fat melts, impurities rise to the surface. Small bits of meat, membrane, connective tissue. These must be removed. Mrs. Ashford skims them off with a perforated spoon, discarding them. When all the fat has melted and been skimmed, it must be strained. Mrs. Ashford ladles the hot liquid fat through several layers of muslin into a clean vessel. The muslin catches any remaining impurities. What passes through is clean, pure tallow, clear, golden, ready for candle making. The tallow is allowed to cool and solidify. As it cools, it becomes ivory-coloured and waxy. This is the tallow that will become candles. Mrs. Ashford has rendered perhaps 40 pounds of tallow from the fat saved over the summer. This should be sufficient for the household's needs. Candle making by the dipping method is a long, repetitive process. It requires patience. It requires attention. But it is not difficult. And the work itself has a certain rhythm that is almost pleasant once you settle into it. Mrs. Ashford has done this work every year for the past 15 years. She knows what to expect. She knows how long it will take. She knows the rhythm of the work. First, the wicks must be prepared. The wicks are made of loosely spun cotton thread, purchased from the draper in the market town. Mrs. Ashford cuts the thread into lengths of about 10 inches, long enough to make a good candle with a little extra at each end for handling. At one end of each wick, she ties a small weight. A button will do, or a small nut, or a pebble. The weight is necessary to keep the wick straight when it is dipped into the hot tallow. Without the weight, the wick would float and twist, and the candle would be uneven. The wicks are attached to a dipping frame. This is a simple device, a wooden rod with notches cut along its length. Several wicks are tied to the rod, hanging down from the notches. The frame can hold perhaps 12 wicks at a time. The tallow is melted again in the same large pot used for rendering. The pot sits over a fire, and the tallow is brought to the right temperature, hot enough to be fully liquid, but not so hot that it smokes. Mrs. Ashford judges this by eye and by experience. Now the dipping begins. The frame with its hanging wicks is lowered into the pot of tallow, submerging all the wicks completely. It is held there for just a moment, perhaps 2 seconds, then lifted out. The tallow clings to the wicks, coating them. The frame is hung on a rack to allow the tallow to cool and harden. This takes a few minutes. While the first frame is cooling, Mrs. Ashford prepares a second frame with more wicks. When the second frame is ready, the first frame's tallow has hardened, and it is time to dip it again. And so the work continues. Dip the first frame. Hang it to cool. Dip the second frame. Hang it to cool. By the time the second frame is hung, the first frame is ready to dip again. Dip, hang, wait. Dip, hang, wait. The rhythm is steady, unchanging. It is almost meditative. Mrs. Ashford's mind wanders as her hands work. She thinks about what still needs to be done before winter. She thinks about the mistress's upcoming dinner party and what dishes will be needed. She thinks about nothing in particular, just lets her mind drift while her hands follow the familiar pattern. Each dipping adds only a thin layer of tallow. The candles build up slowly. After the first few dippings, the wicks are still very thin, barely visible as candles. After 10 dippings, they are beginning to look like candles, slender and tapered. After 20 dippings, they are a good size. After 30, they are thick and solid, perfect household candles. The work takes most of the day. Mrs. Ashford is not alone in this work. 2 of the kitchen maids help her, taking turns managing the fire and dipping the frames. The kitchen is warm from the fire, and the air is thick with the smell of tallow. It is not an unpleasant smell, not really. It is simply the smell of candle making, something familiar and expected. By the end of the day, they have made 300 candles. The candles hang from their frames, cooling completely. When they are fully hardened, they will be removed from the frames. The small weights will be untied. The wicks will be trimmed neatly at both ends. The candles will be stored in a dry room, laid flat on shelves lined with paper, never touching each other. These candles will light the household through the winter. They will burn in the kitchen, in the servants' quarters, in the workrooms, in the hallways. They will make it possible to live and work after the sun has set. For the best rooms, the drawing room, the master's chamber, the dining room when there are guests, beeswax candles are used. Tallow candles, while perfectly functional, smoke somewhat and have a distinct odor. Beeswax candles burn cleaner, with less smoke and a pleasant sweet scent. But beeswax is expensive, even though the estate keeps bees. There are 3 hives in the orchard. The amount of wax produced each year is limited. The wax must be used carefully, sparingly, only for the candles that will be used in the most important rooms. Mrs. Ashford has been saving the beeswax all summer. Each time the honey was harvested from the hives, the wax comb was saved. The honey was drained or pressed out, and the remaining wax was melted down and strained. Now, in late October, she has perhaps 8 pounds of clean beeswax stored in blocks wrapped in paper. Beeswax candles are usually moulded rather than dipped. Dipping works, but moulding produces a more uniform, elegant candle. Mrs. Ashford has a set of tin candle moulds for this purpose. The moulds sit in a wooden frame, 6 moulds to a frame. Each mould is a long tapered tube, open at both ends. First, the wicks must be threaded through the moulds. Each mould has a small hole at the bottom. A wick is threaded through this hole from the bottom, up through the length of the mould, and out through the top. At the top, the wick is tied around a small wooden stick that rests across the opening of the mould, holding the wick in place. At the bottom, the wick is pulled taut and secured with a small knot. When all 6 moulds in the frame are threaded with wicks, the frame is ready. The beeswax is melted slowly in a clean pot. Mrs. Ashford is very careful with the beeswax. It is too precious to waste. The wax melts to a beautiful golden liquid, clear and fragrant. Using a small ladle, Mrs. Ashford pours the melted wax into the moulds. She pours slowly, carefully, filling each mould to the top. The wax should not overflow. That would be wasteful. But it should be filled completely, or the candle will have a depression at the top. The filled moulds are set aside to cool. Beeswax must cool slowly, or it may crack. Mrs. Ashford leaves the moulds undisturbed for several hours, overnight if possible. The wax gradually solidifies, shrinking slightly as it cools. When the wax is completely hard, the candles can be removed. Mrs. Ashford unties the wicks at the bottom of the moulds. She gently pulls on the wooden sticks at the top. The candles slide out of the moulds smoothly. Their surface is glossy and perfect. Each candle is beautiful, smooth, golden tapered, with a slight sheen. Mrs. Ashford trims the wicks neatly at both ends. She polishes each candle gently with a soft cloth, enhancing its natural luster. 24 beeswax candles are made from the summer's wax harvest. They are stored separately from the tallow candles, wrapped in paper, and placed in a special box in the still room. They will be brought out for special occasions, for important guests, for the household's most formal moments. November arrives cold and grey. The trees in the park are bare now, their leaves fallen and rotting on the ground. The garden has given up most of its growth. Only the hardiest vegetables remain, and even those will soon succumb to frost. The morning air has a bite to it that speaks of winter approaching. This is the time for slaughter, in the rhythm of the agricultural year. This has always been so. In summer, animals can graze on grass and be fed on fresh fodder. In winter, there is not enough feed to keep all the livestock alive. The practical solution, the solution that has been followed for centuries, is to slaughter some animals in autumn and preserve their meat to feed the household through the winter months. It is not pleasant work. Mrs. Ashford does not participate in the actual killing. That is work for the farm labourers, men who know how to do it quickly and as humanely as possible. But the processing of the meat, the preserving, the careful handling of every part of the animal, that falls within her domain. The first animal to be slaughtered is a pig. The estate keeps several pigs, fattened through the summer on kitchen scraps, whey from the dairy, and any grain that was too spoiled to be used for other purposes. One of these pigs has been selected for slaughter. It is a good pig, well fed, perhaps 250 pounds. The slaughter takes place early in the morning in the stable yard. Mrs. Ashford is told when it is done. She does not watch, but she knows what has happened. The pig has been killed, bled, scalded in boiling water to loosen the hair, scraped clean and gutted. Now it hangs in the cold room, and the butchering can begin. The butchering is skilled work. The pig is divided into its constituent parts, each part destined for a different use. Nothing is wasted. In a household where economy is essential, every part of the animal has value. The head will be made into brawn, a kind of pressed meat that sets in its own jelly. The trotters, the feet, will be cooked until the connective tissue breaks down into gelatin, providing the base for stock. The liver, kidneys, and heart will be eaten fresh within the next day or two, as these organ meats do not keep. The intestines will be thoroughly cleaned and used as casings for sausages. The blood has already been collected in a large basin during the slaughter, stirred constantly to prevent it from clotting. This blood will be made into black pudding, mixed with oatmeal, fat, and spices, stuffed into casings and cooked. Black pudding is a valuable food, nutritious and filling, and it keeps reasonably well when hung in a cool place. The fat is particularly precious. The thick layer of fat under the skin and around the internal organs is rendered into lard, pure, white, cooking fat that will be used for baking, frying, and pastry making throughout the winter. The rendering is done in the kitchen in large pots, the fat melting slowly into liquid, then cooling into snowy white blocks. But the most important parts, the parts that must be preserved for long-term storage, are the hams and the bacon. These sides of meat will be cured with salt, transforming fresh pork into preserved food that can last for months. The sides of pork destined to become bacon are brought to the cold larder. Each side is a large, flat piece of meat, the belly of the pig, with alternating layers of meat and fat. Mrs. Ashford examines each side carefully, making sure there are no cuts or tears in the meat that might allow salt to penetrate unevenly. The curing mixture is prepared. This is a recipe Mrs. Ashford learned from the housekeeper who trained her, who learned it from the housekeeper before her. It is a mixture of salt, brown sugar, and saltpeter. The proportions are specific. For every 10 pounds of meat, 2 pounds of coarse salt, 4 ounces of brown sugar, and half an ounce of saltpeter. The saltpeter, potassium nitrate, is the ingredient that keeps the meat pink and prevents certain types of bacterial growth. It must be used carefully, measured exactly. Too much would be dangerous, but the right amount is safe and effective. Mrs. Ashford measures it precisely, using an apothecary scale that she keeps locked in her office. The curing mixture is rubbed into the meat. This is work that requires some vigour. Mrs. Ashford and one of the kitchen maids work together, rubbing the mixture into every surface of each side of pork. The meat must be completely covered, no part left untreated. When each side is thoroughly rubbed with the curing mixture, it is placed in a large wooden trough in the coldest corner of the cold larder. The sides are stacked with more curing mixture sprinkled between each layer. When all the sides are in the trough, they are covered completely with any remaining curing mixture, then weighted down with a heavy board and stones. The weight is important. It presses the meat firmly, helping the cure to penetrate evenly. It also prevents any part of the meat from being exposed to air, which could cause spoilage. Now begins the waiting. The meat will stay in the cure for 3 weeks. Every 3 or 4 days, Mrs. Ashford comes to the cold larder and turns the meat. Each side is removed from the trough, examined, then replaced in a different position. This ensures even curing. Any liquid that has accumulated in the bottom of the trough, a mixture of water drawn out of the meat by the salt, and dissolved curing mixture, is stirred back into the salt. Mrs. Ashford watches the meat carefully during these 3 weeks. She checks for any signs of spoilage, any unusual colour, any bad smell. But if the work has been done properly, if the cold larder is cold enough, there will be no problems. The salt does its work. The meat gradually becomes firmer, darker. The water is drawn out. The bacon is being created. After 3 weeks, the bacon is removed from the cure. Each side is brushed clean of excess salt and hung from hooks in the ceiling of the dry larder. Here, in the cool, dry air, the bacon will continue to mature. Over the coming weeks and months, it will dry further, the flavors will develop and concentrate. By midwinter, it will be perfect, ready to be sliced and cooked, providing salty, savory richness to the household's meals. The hams, the hind legs of the pig, are treated differently from the bacon. Hams receive a longer cure and are often smoked as well, giving them a more complex flavour and a harder texture that allows even longer storage. The hams are prepared in much the same way as the bacon. They are rubbed with the curing mixture, salt, brown sugar, saltpeter, and placed in a separate trough. But because hams are thicker than bacon, they require a longer cure. Mrs. Ashford will leave them in the salt for 6 weeks, turning them every few days. The waiting is patient work. There is nothing to be done except monitor and wait. Mrs. Ashford marks a date in her notebook. Hams in cure, November 8th. To be removed, December 20th. When the hams finally come out of the cure, they will be rinsed in cold water to remove excess salt, then dried thoroughly. At this point, Mrs. Ashford must decide whether to smoke them or not. Smoking adds flavour and provides an additional layer of preservation. The smoke contains compounds that inhibit bacterial growth and give the meat a distinctive taste and aroma. The estate has a small smokehouse, a wooden shed with no windows and a fire pit in the floor. Hams to be smoked are hung from hooks in the ceiling of this shed. A fire is built in the pit using hardwood, oak or apple or cherry. The wood is chosen for its smoke characteristics. Different woods give different flavours. The fire is built carefully. It must not be too hot. This is smoking, not cooking. The fire should produce plenty of smoke, but relatively little heat. It is kept smouldering steadily, day and night, for a week or more. Someone must tend it constantly, adding wood, adjusting the airflow, ensuring it never goes out or burns too hot. The hams hang in the dense smoke, gradually absorbing its flavour, developing a dark mahogany crust on their surface. The smoke penetrates the meat, slowly preserving it, flavouring it, transforming it. Mrs. Ashford checks the hams daily during the smoking. She looks at their colour, at the formation of the pellicle, the tacky surface that develops as the meat dries. She judges by experience when the smoking is complete. When the hams are finally ready, they are removed from the smokehouse, wrapped in muslin, and hung in the coolest, darkest room in the house. Here they will hang for the rest of the winter and into spring. A properly cured and smoked ham can last for a year or more. It is an investment against future hunger, a piece of autumn captured and held through time. Not all meat is cured with salt. Some is preserved by potting, an old method that seals cooked meat under a layer of fat, preventing air from reaching it and causing spoilage. Potted meats are made from odd cuts, pieces that are too small to cure, leftover bits from butchering, or meat that has been cooked fresh and partially eaten, with some left over. Nothing is wasted. Even small amounts of meat can be preserved. The process is simple but requires care. The meat is cooked until it is very tender, falling apart easily. This might mean boiling it for several hours or roasting it slowly until it is completely soft. When the meat is cooked, it is shredded finely with forks or pounded in a mortar. The goal is to break down the meat into very small pieces that will pack together densely. Spices are added. The exact spices vary depending on the type of meat and personal preference. But common additions include mace, black pepper, nutmeg, and a little salt. The spices not only add flavor but also have some preservative properties. The spiced, shredded meat is packed tightly into small earthenware pots. Mrs. Ashford presses it down firmly with the back of a spoon, eliminating any air pockets. The pot should be filled to within half an inch of the top. Now the sealing, butter is clarified. This means heating butter gently until the milk solids separate and sink to the bottom, leaving pure golden butter fat floating on top. This clarified butter is poured over the meat, covering it completely, filling the pot to the very brim. The butter seal is critical. It must be complete, with no gaps, no thin spots. The butter acts as a barrier between the meat and the air. As long as this barrier remains intact, the meat inside will be preserved. When the butter has solidified, a circle of paper is placed on top of the butter, and another paper is tied over the entire top of the pot with string. The pot is labeled with its contents and the date. Stored in a cool place, potted meats will keep for several months. They are convenient. A pot can be opened, a portion taken out for a meal, and the pot resealed with a fresh layer of butter. Potted beef, potted ham, potted tongue, potted rabbit, potted game. Each one a small treasure, a way of preserving the summer's abundance for winter's needs. The scraps of meat too small for anything else, mixed with fat and seasoning, become sausages. Sausage making is an old craft, and Mrs. Ashford has learned it well over the years. The meat is minced finely, chopped with a large knife on a wooden board, again and again, until it is reduced to small pieces. Fat is added, pork fat usually, as it provides flavor and helps the sausage bind together. The proportion is about 2 parts meat to 1 part fat. Seasonings are mixed in. Salt, certainly. Pepper. Sage is traditional in pork sausages. Sometimes thyme or marjoram. A little mace. The mixture is kneaded by hand, mixing everything together thoroughly. Mrs. Ashford tastes a tiny amount of the raw mixture, just enough to check the seasoning. Too salty? Add more meat. Not enough salt? Add a pinch more. The seasoning must be right. These sausages will be eaten over the coming months, and they must be flavorful. The mixture is stuffed into casings. The casings are the pig's intestines, which have been thoroughly cleaned, scrubbed inside and out, soaked in salt water, rinsed again and again until they are white and odorless. They are slippery and awkward to work with, but they are strong and flexible. A handful of the sausage mixture is formed into a ball and pressed into one end of a casing. Mrs. Ashford squeezes the casing, forcing the mixture along its length, filling it. Not too full. The casing must not burst, but full enough that the sausage is plump and firm. When the casing is filled, it is twisted at intervals to divide it into individual sausages. Then the string of sausages is hung to dry in a cool, airy place. Some sausages will be eaten fresh within a few days. Others will be smoked. like the hams, to preserve them longer. By the time the pig has been completely processed, the household has gained bacon, hams, sausages, potted meats, lard, and black pudding. An entire pig, transformed into food for the winter. It is the economy of survival, practiced for generations. By late November, the household begins to turn inward. The work of autumn, the harvesting, the preserving, the preparing is nearly complete. Now attention turns to the house itself, to making it comfortable and efficient for the long, dark, cold months ahead. In a large Georgian house, not every room is used in winter. It would be impossibly expensive to heat every room. Coal is costly. Wood must be gathered and stored. The work of keeping fires burning in every room would occupy the servants entirely. So the practical solution is to close certain rooms for the winter, to shut them up, cover them, and let them rest cold and dark until spring returns. Mrs. Ashford consults with the mistress of the house about which rooms can be closed. The decision is made based on the household's needs. How many family members will be in residence? Will there be guests? What activities will take place during the winter months? It is decided that the summer drawing room can be closed. This is a lighter, airier room, pleasant in warm weather but draughty and cold in winter. The family will use the winter drawing room instead, smaller, easier to heat, with heavier curtains and a more efficient fireplace. The guest chambers on the upper floor can be closed as well. There will be few visitors during the winter months. The roads are often impassable and travel is uncomfortable. The 1 or 2 guest chambers that might be needed can be prepared quickly if necessary. The garden room, with its large windows overlooking the grounds, must be closed. The windows make it beautiful in summer, but impossible to heat in winter. The morning room will serve for the ladies' informal activities. Mrs. Ashford makes a list of rooms to be closed. Then she organizes the work. This is a project that will take several days and require help from all the household servants. Each room is closed following the same careful process. Nothing is left to chance. A room improperly closed might suffer damage over the winter, mold, pest infestation, deterioration of fabrics and furnishings. The summer drawing room is closed first. Mrs. Ashford supervises as the maids begin their work. First, everything that might attract pests is removed. This means food, certainly. Any plates of biscuits or candy that might have been left in the room. But it also means anything made of wool or silk, as these are attractive to moths. The curtains are taken down. These are heavy damask curtains, expensive and beautiful, and they must be protected. They are shaken out thoroughly, taken outside and beaten to remove dust. Then, they are examined for any signs of moth damage. Finding none, they are folded carefully and stored in a trunk with bags of lavender and wormwood, which help repel moths. The cushion covers are removed from the furniture and stored the same way. The upholstered furniture itself cannot be moved easily, so it must be protected in place. Large sheets are brought, plain linen sheets kept specifically for this purpose and draped over each piece of furniture. The sheets protect the fabric from dust and from light, which can fade colors. The carpet is rolled up. 2 maids work together, rolling from one end of the room to the other. The rolled carpet is heavy and awkward. It is tied with string to keep it from unrolling, then carried to a storage room and laid flat on a shelf. Before rolling, the carpet is swept and beaten, and a few sprigs of wormwood are scattered along its length to discourage insects. The room is swept thoroughly. The floor, the walls, even the ceiling. Any cobwebs are removed. The windows are cleaned inside. Then the shutters are closed and latched. With the shutters closed, the room becomes dim, grey, shadowy. It takes on the quality of a room that is waiting, suspended, paused. The door is closed. Mrs. Ashford locks it and hangs the key on her chatelaine. The room will not be opened again until April. While some rooms are being closed, others are being prepared for heavy use. The winter drawing room, the library, the family parlour. These rooms will be the heart of the household's life for the next 4 months. They must be made as comfortable, as warm, as inviting as possible. Mrs. Ashford begins with the windows. The summer curtains, light fabric, perhaps muslin or cotton, are taken down. In their place, heavy winter curtains are hung. These curtains are made of wool or velvet, lined with linen, and they are thick enough to keep out drafts. They are drawn closed at night, helping to hold the heat inside the room. Draft excluders are placed at the bottoms of doors. These are simple, long fabric tubes, filled with sawdust or sand. They lie across the threshold, blocking the cold air that seeps under the door. Every small measure helps. Carpets are laid if they were not already in place. A carpet on the floor provides warmth underfoot and helps insulate the room from the cold stone or wood below. Mrs. Ashford chooses carpets carefully. Larger, heavier ones for the main rooms, smaller rugs for areas near chairs where people will sit. The fireplaces are prepared. Each fireplace is cleaned, the ashes removed, the grate swept. Firewood is laid in, split logs of oak and ash which burn hot and long. Kindling is prepared, small sticks and pieces of wood that will catch easily when the fire is lit. A basket of coal sits ready beside each fireplace for adding to the fire once it is well established. Fire screens are positioned near each fireplace. These screens serve 2 purposes. They protect people from sparks flying out of the fire, and they can be adjusted to direct heat into the room, rather than letting it escape up the chimney. Mrs. Ashford checks the supply of candles in each room. Candlesticks are placed on tables, ready to be lit when darkness falls. Tapers are stored in drawers, extra candles that can be brought out as needed. She checks the supply of writing materials in the library and the parlour. Paper, ink, quills. Books are dusted and arranged neatly on shelves. Sewing baskets are stocked with thread, needles and small scissors for the ladies' handwork during the long evenings. Each detail is attended to. Each small comfort is provided. The goal is to make the winter rooms not just functional, but pleasant. Places where the family will want to spend time, where the darkness and cold of winter can be forgotten, at least for a little while. Finally, Mrs. Ashford turns her attention to her own domain, the still room. This room has been the centre of her autumn work, but now it requires a final review before winter truly sets in. She walks slowly around the room, looking at the shelves. They are full now, fuller than they have been all year. Jars of jam and jelly, bottles of preserved fruit, dried herbs in glass jars, cordials and syrups, medicines and ointments, candles stacked neatly. Everything labelled, everything in its place. She opens her inventory book and begins a final count. She goes shelf by shelf, item by item, checking what she has against what she recorded during her inventory months ago. Most items match her expectations. Some have been used. Jam served at breakfast, herbs used in cooking, medicines dispensed for minor ailments. But most are still there, waiting. She makes notes of any items that are running low. Chamomile. She has used more than expected for calming teas. Horehound syrup. There have been several coughs already, even before winter has truly arrived. These items should be replaced if possible, though opportunities for gathering or purchasing will be limited now. She checks the candles. 300 tallow candles, minus the few that have already been used. 24 beeswax candles, all accounted for. This should be sufficient, but she makes a mental note to be conservative with the beeswax candles. They are too precious to waste. She examines the preserves one more time. Any jar that shows even a hint of mold or fermentation is removed immediately. Better to lose one jar now than to let it contaminate others on the shelf. But all look good. The seals are tight. The contents are clear and bright. She checks the medicines particularly carefully. These may be needed urgently during the winter. The fever remedies, yarrow tincture, elderberry syrup. The cough remedies, horehound syrup, coltsfoot tea. The remedies for upset stomachs, for headaches, for sleeplessness. All are present, all are clearly labelled, all are ready. When she has finished her review, she updates her inventory book with the final counts. Then she closes the book and places it carefully on her desk. She looks around the room one more time. The still room looks as it should. Orderly, well-stocked, ready. The shelves are full. The work of autumn is complete. She feels a deep sense of satisfaction. This is what she was trained to do. This is what she does well. The household is ready for winter. They will eat well. They will have light in the darkness. They will have medicines when they are needed. The work of 6 months, the planning, the gathering, the preserving, the preparing, has all been for this moment of readiness. On the last day of November, Mrs. Ashford sits at her desk and makes her final accounting. She has a large ledger book, the household account book, and in it she records everything that has been prepared and stored. She begins with the preserves. 47 pots jam, various fruits, 43 bottles preserved fruit, 18 pots apple butter, 6 bottles pickled vegetables. She continues line by line, recording everything. The dried goods. 80 pounds flour, white. 130 pounds flour, coarse. 70 pounds oats. Barley, peas, beans, sufficient quantities. The salted and preserved meats. 8 sides bacon. 4 hams, smoked. 2 hams, unsmoked. 12 pots potted meats. 50 sausages. The herbs and medicines. 24 jars dried, herbs. 16 bottles cordials and syrups. 8 tinctures. 12 ointments and salves. The candles. 296 tallow candles. 24 beeswax candles. The stored apples. 147 apples in storage. 2 barrels cider. Line after line, page after page. Everything accounted for. Everything recorded. Mrs. Ashford's hand moves steadily across the paper, her script small and neat and precise. When she has finished, she totals certain categories. She calculates how much food the household has stored. She estimates how long it will last. Based on the number of people to be fed and the normal rate of consumption. Her calculations suggest that the household has sufficient supplies to last through March, possibly into April. If the winter is mild and the roads remain passable, additional supplies can be purchased from the market town. But if the winter is harsh, if they are isolated for months, they will be fine. They have what they need. She makes a note in the margin of the ledger. Household prepared for winter. 1772, 1773. Supply sufficient. All in order. She closes the ledger. She returns it to its place on the shelf. She puts away her pen and ink. She stands, stretches her back. She has been sitting for a long time, and looks out the window. Outside, darkness is falling. It is only 4 o'clock. but already the light is fading. Winter is coming. But inside, the house is warm. The fires are lit. The candles are ready. The larders are full. The household is prepared. Mrs. Ashford picks up her keys from the desk and hangs them at her waist. She leaves her office and walks down the hallway toward the kitchen. There is always more work to be done. Dinner must be prepared. Fires must be tended. The rhythm of the household continues, unchanging, steady. But the great work, the preparing, the preserving, the laying in of supplies, that work is finished. And Mrs. Ashford can rest, knowing that she has done it well.